If fat loss and body recomp is your goal,
Yep.
well, understanding these two hormones and how they work is going to be crucial for you. So today, the team is going to educate you
We don't need no education.
on these two hormones, what they are, how they work, and by the end, you'll know 4 ways to manage them.
They're nice.
So let's get the team in here and get started on this. So we've got Justin and Gab with us as always. Thank you for joining us. And so the people these days they make a big deal about hormones, right? And so we've got kind of 2 important ones here to talk about. So the first one we got is ghrelin. So tell the people what this ghrelin. It kind of sounds like gremlin. So I don't know if it's like an evil hormone or something, but it kind of
turn into a gremlin.
Yeah. If I do something after midnight, am I going to turn into a gremlin? But yeah, so what's ghrelin all about, Gab?
Yeah, it's funny. That's how I remembered it when I was going through school. Like ghrelin turns you into a gremlin because it is the hunger hormone. It is secreted during times of low caloric intake to sort of have this evolutionary function of reminding you not to starve to death. So when calorie intake is low, ghrelin is secreted and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm kind of hungry.
All right. Oh, you were too fast. I was trying to get this in there because it gets you hangry, apparently. Yeah. Hangry gremlin. All right, so that's ghrelin. So then the other one that we want to focus on is I guess the opposite of that, right? So we've got this fancy one, leptin. So Justin, what's leptin all about?
Yeah, so leptin is a hormone produced by fat cells, and it plays a crucial role in regulating appetite, your metabolism, energy balance. And it is basically the opposite. It's the satiety hormone, right? And it signals to your brain, I think more specifically the hypothalamus, that you have enough energy stored, like you're good to go. So it helps regulate appetite, controls energy expenditure, and is your body's signal, right, to like slow down. Whereas like ghrelin is produced in the stomach and signals to the brain, you better go eat something, right? You get hangry if not. So that's what leptin does, and its importance.
All right. So then kind of like the other part of this, like understanding these 2 hormones is basically how do we manage them? Because obviously if you're hungry all the time and your goal is for fat loss and body recomp, that's going to make things difficult, right? Because if you're hungry all the time and you want to keep eating, then you have to be in a deficit. We know that you have to be in a deficit, right? So what is it about? Justin, you talk a lot about like protein is the most important of the macros, right? When it comes to these. So when it comes to these hormones, then why is eating enough protein so important?
Yeah. So protein is the most important macronutrient if you're doing 4 to 5 watts per week, right? It helps with recovery. It helps with satiety, helps with, properly being able to recover and repair muscle tissue, which is something that happens almost on a daily basis for us doing our WODs and Metcons, because we're going to in ranges of motion at high levels of intensity, right? And so protein and also fiber actually will keep these things like ghrelin levels lower because they make you feel fuller for longer, right? And so eating enough protein and consistently eating enough protein throughout the day is going to help manage those hormones that lower those urges and overeating times of the day or weekend that we usually find ourselves in.
Yeah. I think probably at the end of the day, I'll know if I haven't had enough protein, because like I'll just feel like a bear, just like wanting to, that comes out of hibernation, like, and they just want to eat everything that's like, that's how I get. And I'm like, oh man, I better like try to focus on some protein, because of how hungry I am. And I know I probably did not do a good job of getting it throughout the day. So better eat enough protein, people. This next one, I think is important for especially, I don't know. Well, maybe you guys will know. Like, is this more important as you get older or younger? But prioritizing sleep. Like, do you
That's
need
a good
more sleep when you
question.
get older, or what? Because I feel like I do.
I would venture to say that you're probably not getting enough as you get older, and so therefore making
Mm,
up for it is more important. As we have children, as our lives get a little bit more stressful. I mean, when I was in high school, I would sleep until noon every day. I had
right.
no, major responsibilities that were keeping me up at night. But the interesting thing about sleep, and I think the thing that most people don't like fully recognize about sleep, is that having poor sleep is going to increase your ghrelin. So if you are not sleeping long enough, if your sleep quality is low, you're going to get more production of the hunger hormone. And so what happens, right? You're hungry throughout the day. And as we know, it's very hard to ignore that. But additionally, when you don't get enough sleep, you're also going to reduce the amount of leptin that you have. So now the hormone that tells you you're full is lower. The hormone that tells you you're hungry is higher. And so you're just setting yourself up to be hangry all day. So it is really important to make sure that you are getting enough sleep, enough quality sleep, that you're limiting your caffeine, at least 6 to 8 hours before it's time to go to bed, that you have a good like sleep routine in terms of turning off screens and making sure you're winding down, because you are setting yourself up to be a hungry disaster tomorrow if you don't.
Nice. It's like a double whammy with that one. Like
Yeah.
your ghrelin is high and your leptin is low, and you're like, oh man, that's a cocktail for disaster. So all right, so you mentioned stress, a little bit in there too with sleep being connected to that. And I think that cortisol is something that gets talked about a lot as a hormone, in terms of especially talking about fat loss. So what is it about managing stress then that is so important in
Yeah,
regards
stress.
to these hormones too?
Yeah. Cortisol is the stress hormone. I mean, it's produced by our adrenal glands, and it can come from a lot of things. I mean, it can come from poor sleep. It comes from, emotional stress or mental stress, bad day at work, whatever the case may be, right? And cortisol is a hormone that's actually necessary. Peaks in the morning, and then throughout the day it can go up and down. And cortisol has main impacts, and we need cortisol spikes to regulate blood sugar, suppress inflammation, hormone balance, stuff like that. But obviously, high cortisol all the time negatively impacts our ability for muscle recovery and fat loss, performance, especially in women, right? Which is why it's so associative when people talk about cortisol in women. But it's not in the absence of a calorie surplus, right? So, like what cortisol typically does is people lean on food as the emotional support for themselves when they're stressed, and they feel like their flight system is elevated, and they tend to overeat or indulge in things that they typically wouldn't usually eat to feel better. And so that's where the problems with cortisol really come in.
I gotcha. So that was going to be kind of like my next question then, is like, is there a connection with high cortisol and high ghrelin, because, to make you feel hungry all the time? So that was kind of like what I was curious about with that.
Yeah.
All right, the last one then is something, Gab, that I know that you are passionate about. You preach this a lot about eating enough. Don't have these extreme deficits in your diet. So why is that such a big deal with ghrelin and leptin?
So the body really loves to be in homeostasis, right? That's when everything is like peachy keen, nice and even, nothing is trying to change. And anytime we add in some kind of caloric deficit, we are disrupting that homeostasis. And so our body is going to try to fight back, right? It's going to do whatever it can to get us back to that homeostatic place. So if we go into a deficit that is extreme, if we wake up one morning and say, I need to lose 30 pounds in 3 months, so I'm going to eat an extraordinarily low amount of calories today to make that happen, we are creating a hormonal disruption in the body, right? There are going to be so many alarms that go off to try to get us back to where we need to be. Things are going to be going berserk. And surely within that array of disaster is disrupted levels of ghrelin and leptin. And so if you want to do this properly, if you want to be in a deficit that is going to create meaningful change without creating a cocktail of disaster, you need to make sure that you are in an appropriate deficit, appropriate for your size, appropriate for your activity level, appropriate for your goal. You need to make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row prior to this deficit. You need to make sure that what you want is actually on the other side of a deficit, because sometimes it's not. And ultimately, the best way to do that is to seek the advice of a professional.
There you go. Perfect segue into, talking about how CBG can help you with getting all your ducks in a row. That stood out to me. And I'm like, hey, there you go. That's why a CBG coach is important. And so if you want help getting those ducks in a row and making sure that you're eating enough, and really just whatever your goals are, if it's for fat loss and body recomp, or if it's to get, strong, or both at the same time, then click the link in the description and learn how CBG can help you out with this, and how a coach can help keep you on track and keep all of your ducks lined up so that you can avoid all of these things and keep don't turn into a ghrelin gremlin, and and maybe have more leptin in your life. So with that is all that we have for you today. So for Justin, for Gab, I'm Joel. We're telling you to quit tracking those macros, stay consistent, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.